Claire Nouvon from the Bloom Association. Just explain first of all what happened in the vote today. How did MEPs vote?
They voted against the ban of deep sea bottom trawling. Maria Damanaki, the Fisheries Commissioner, made it clear last night that it wasn't about stopping all fishing in the deep sea, it was about converting to more sustainable and more selective gear. But MEPs have voted so that we can keep on destroying the oceans, and especially UK waters, actually.
You didn't get the ban that you wanted, but nonetheless, there are more protection. MEPs have called for some more protection for the environment. Isn't there good news in this for you?
What happened is that MEPs have voted basically to put EU law in a sort of conformity to make it, align on international standards. You have to know that Europe has actually been pushing at the United Nations for a lot of years, and in 2006, when the first UN resolution with very high environmental standards was adopted, the EU actually pushed for this. So what we've just done is actually just align with 7 years delay what we have actually already enacted in international waters, but on some areas we're actually weaker than what we have adopted on international waters. So I think there is no room there to claim, being really ambitious or whatsoever. This is just political language that you should really watch for.
What do you think then will happen to these environments? How big are your concerns about the future of some of these ecosystems?
Well, the fact that we can keep destroying as much as we want, the deep sea and especially Scottish waters for that matter, is really worrying because there is a scientific consensus on this file, which is really quite rare. But we have more than 300 scientists which have openly supported the ban of deep sea bottom trawling because, yet again, it's not about stopping all deep sea fishing, it's about just eliminating the most destructive gear. And nonetheless, you can see MEPs like Struan Stevenson just don't even listen to scientists. It's as if science was not worth anything, it didn't exist, and so they're oblivious to these facts. So they look at what? Just some pressure from the fishing lobby, that's all that counts. But as a matter of fact, the French boats which come and fish in UK waters actually land the fish, in Lochinver, and they probably actually land the fish themselves because that's one of the things that Intermarché has been really, fighting with their own fishermen about. They wanted their fishermen to gut the fish on board, which the fishermen weren't happy about, and to land the crates. And then they fly their fishermen with their own jet, and then they truck the fish down to France with their own trucks. So no, I'm sorry, I'm a bit angry that this whole manipulation of the file based on nothing but completely surreal facts which have been made up completely with no sources have pushed half of this parliament to really endorse such an indefensible file and an indefensible position.
Some MEPs have said that if a ban had gone ahead, it would have gone too far, that it would have covered the continental shelf or the sloping continental shelf at a not so deep level, which is important to fishermen in Scotland, and therefore they couldn't support this ban. Is there any argument in that instead of targeting just the deepest sea, that this would have had an incidental effect on the less deep waters, and that was really what the concern was for Scotland?
The ban on deep sea bottom trawling was actually created to be only applicable below 600 meters, which really put the huge bulk of EU fisheries and Scottish fisheries on the safe side. So, of course, you know what it's like. These debates, do you think they're rational? Are they based on science? Are they based on facts? No. They're based on a just emotional hyperinflation of the reality. And that's what's happened here. The reality is the fishing industry was really scared that a ban altogether of any gear would come along because they're thinking this would set a precedent, against actually having, some European institutions telling them how to fish. And they don't want to be told how to fish because they think that they know, what effects and what impacts they have on the environment better than anyone, better than scientists for that matter. And so you have Scottish scientists which have, openly claimed that these fisheries are extremely, destructive for your heritage. We have our French boats subsidized by your money coming through your waters to destroy your heritage. If you think that's fine, then great. You can cheer and, applaud Struan Stevenson's stake, but, and take on this. But if you don't, then maybe you should come and actually join our, our work to make sure that at least there is a market and response to this. And in France, we've seen that Casino and Carrefour, which are huge retailer brands, have already said that they would stop, selling deep sea fish as a result of, the pressure that was put by citizens in France. And that's really my hope at this stage. I mean, since politicians are not reliable, they're not trustworthy, they actually threatened to kill the file in the Pêche Committee. And now they're claiming, we had this great compromise that was so strongly negotiated. Negotiated? Do you call negotiating when you have a knife under your throat? No, I call it being basically hijacked or something like that.
You mentioned there that some French supermarkets have decided that they won't stock some of these deep sea species. Would you like to see the same happen in the UK? I understand that some of these species are very valuable to fishermen. They want to, at least a few boats want to go after this type of fish. Do you think is it pressure from consumers that you'd now like to see?
Well, pressure from consumers. I mean, basically, when you cannot trust your politicians anymore, because they are like that with the fishing industry, right? There's this political deal between the economic stakes, the political lobbying of these industrial fishermen, and the politicians themselves. So what are we left with? We have individual mobilization, we have citizen mobilizations, and we have consumer, brands, listening to consumers and taking their expectations, their demands on board. And Waitrose in the UK, for example, has already done a lot in terms of having a really clearly sustainable procurement policy. And I really just hope that other brands are going to follow on these acts. I think the only thing that we can do now is to really ask consumers to say we don't want these deep sea fish, because when we eat them, we know that they've actually caught endangered species, and we don't want that. We don't want to think that when you're eating your fish at home at night, you're actually eating an animal that was captured with endangered animals, and that actually led to the destruction of species which can live up to 4,000 years old. The record of longevity is actually held by a deep sea coral, which lives in your waters yet again. And so that's what happens when you eat your little fish fillet at night. So yes, let's please at least steer clear, since the industry and politicians are not doing their part, we can do our part.